Good afternoon. My name is Katrin Hagemann. I am not Henriette Geiger, who is the ambassador here, the head of delegation of the European Union in Kenya. My name is Katrin Hagemann. I'm the deputy and here in Kenya, and unfortunately the ambassador is still on her way, so I'm taking over her speech. So I welcome you all to this event, which will examine the opportunities and challenges for sustainable green finance in the African context. For years, Kenya has developed sustainable financing with its Treasury Department, the private sector and civil society, and is ready to inspire others. This event is therefore co-organized with the Treasury at the Government of Kenya. Africa is expected to be the hardest hit by the impact of climate change. We've heard this repeatedly now. This is compounded by the massive needs of investment to address poverty issues and deliver on the SDGs by 2030. The role of sustainable finance offers opportunities to raise the funds necessary to achieve these objectives. Despite rapid growth in recent years, the global flows of sustainable investment capital are still small. Sustainable investment is largely focused on Europe, the US, and China, while emerging and developing economies in particular are lagging behind. For African countries, sustainability-related financial instruments like green bonds represent a large untapped potential. The interest from private and institutional green investors for emerging markets is growing, and today we will discuss what is needed to make them come on board in the future. In this event, we will draw on the lessons and experiences from the Kenyan example, knowing they will be valuable for other countries in Africa and elsewhere, but also for policymakers and investors around the globe. We have a strong panel with us, and I won't introduce them all now because you all see them, but I will introduce them once we get to each speaker so that you know exactly who we are talking about. I think we're ready to get started. I would like to inform our audience that you can take part in this discussion on the Slido webpage, and we will pick up questions and comments from you. I will then ask the speakers to address those. Let me now hand over the floor to our first presenter. And I hope that Peter Odengo is here. Let me just quickly check on that. Peter is here, I hear?
Yes, so I'm here with you. How are you?
Excellent. Very good. Thank you. Peter Odengo is the Director of the Climate Finance Department in the National Treasury of the Government of Kenya. And Peter, tell us a little bit about how the government of Kenya has worked on climate finance over the years and some of your priorities ahead. Over to you.
Good. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for giving Kenya this great moment to share with the rest of the team our experiences over the last 10 years or so. Kenya has walked a long journey in ensuring that climate change actions are mainstreamed within the policies and legislative framework, which we started way back in 2009. The first one was National Climate Change. The first study which really made Kenya to wake up to see the importance of mainstreaming was a study conducted by the Stockholm Environment Institute in 2009, which clearly indicated that Kenya is losing between 2 to 3% of our GDP as a result of climate change impacts. That sparked the government response mechanism in which we developed a national climate change response strategy in 2010. That study gave a glaring figures that we are really working on. Our economy is not doing well as a result of climate change. It was followed by the development of National Climate Change Action Plan 2013 to 2017, which now require the mainstreaming of climate change within our instruments medium-term expenditure framework. But before that, then we said that the country will never move in a strategic way without a fully fledged climate change act. And in 2016, the national Kenya was one of the countries that enacted National Climate Change Act 2016, which requires all the technical line ministries and all the stakeholders, including the private sector, the civil society organization, the government, both at national and subnational level, was therefore to take active role in financing or providing support to mitigation and adaptation. But that one was also followed by our first national determined contribution which we committed to reduce our greenhouse gas emission by 2030 by 30%. Then, although Kenya is only emitting 0.03 of the greenhouse gas emission. But as we are moving on, we found that the key element and the pillar of financing climate change is climate finance. And in 2018, we had the National Climate Finance Policy, which now clearly gave a roadmap and a policy directive on how both public and private sector can come in to support the government efforts in financing climate change. Of course, adaptation is our priority, but if you look at the money, the resources that are flowing in, it is biased towards mitigation because it is the easy option. According to the study that we did, that Kenya did, the landscape of climate finance, which we launched early this year, we found out that only 28% of the total 2.4 billion US dollars, which we mobilized in 2018, 2019, was directed toward adaptation, which is our priority. And of that, about 60% was being from the public sector, that is government limited resources. So in view of this, we had a very clear direction that we need to do more. We need to bring in the private sector to support the government. And as a result of that, we have the National Treasury and Planning has been working very closely with a number of UK government and also EU in promoting our Building Back Better Green and Build Back Better Green and Resilience Green Economy, which is following our 2015 Green Economy and Implementation Plan, which is 2030. And as a result of that, we moved and started working on the sovereign green bond framework, which was reviewed, and we got medium green. And now Kenya is ready to issue the sovereign green bond to support mostly our adaptation priorities and also to enhance our low carbon emission development path. So when you look at that, financial resources also have not been flowing where it is needed better. The people who feel the impact of climate change are the local people in the grassroots. In 2020, the National Treasury and the government of Kenya with the Climate Change Directorate and also the Council of Governors designed a program, a lighthouse pioneer program called Financing Locally Led Climate Action, FLOCA. That program is taking devolving climate finance to the grassroots, the lowest level possible. We are very happy to inform the team that the World Bank, the Daneda, Swedish government, and the Denmark government came together, and that is almost a $1 billion US program to finance locally led climate action, where the people themselves are identifying their problems, and those are the ones now to access the money. Since we started the design and it was approved a few days ago, on 26, a number of 32 sub-counties have already done their climate change action plan. They have also established their climate change path at the local level. They have also dedicated their climate change unit, and they have also dedicated 2% of their development resources to support, as co-financing to support this. So far, we have mobilized 251 million US dollars to support this program. And I'm very, very happy that we are working with the EU nicely to get the balance and other development partners so that we can. We are ready to share our experiences. We are ready to also work with our counterparts so that they should not follow the long journey we followed. Thank you very much. And we are very happy to share with you our challenges also too. It was not a walk in the park. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Sorry to jump in because we have a very tight schedule, but thank you very much. Building Back Better, and how do we finance that? I think that's really the big question. Our next speaker, Vimal Palmer, is a senior capital market specialist in the financial sector, Deepening Africa. And Vimal Palmer, where do you see the main barriers in the development of capital markets, in particular for environmental, social, and governance instruments and products? And how can we better include Africa in such instruments and products?
Thank you very much, Catherine, for the question. I think capital markets, especially when it comes to ESG in Africa and also in Kenya, some of the barriers is mainly on the lack of capacity and awareness of ESG and also ESG data. This has brought to significant momentum, which is not taking place in the ESG space. But also, if you look at globally, the ESG frameworks or policies are still work in progress. So there's a lot of happening on the environmental, social, and governance aspects, not only in Kenya and Africa, but also globally. So that is, those are the two main barriers, but also if you look at the governance frameworks that we are looking at when it comes to ESG, these frameworks are not very well understood by the market stakeholders. And here by market stakeholders, we are also referring to capital seekers, as well as some of the capital providers, because it is still, the frameworks are still work in progress. The government's mechanisms are still continuing to be improved in Africa and globally. And with ESG, mainly accountability and transparency has been very key, because when such products or instruments are brought to the market, I think they are meant to look at the environmental benefits or social benefits for the people of Africa and Kenya, or globally, which we may speak. This hasn't been received so well by some of the countries because of the lack of understanding. It also involves a lot of reporting mechanism, because the capital providers would like to know where the funds are being used. So the use of proceeds is very important. And lastly, but not least, one of the other key issue has been some of the products or instruments which capital providers are looking for have to be intentional and impactful. This is a bit different from the normal conventional instruments where, you know, it was mainly commercially driven, but now investors globally and in Africa are looking at products which are showing some benefits to the environment in terms of impact, and it's intentional. So capital raising is not just done for the sake of using the proceeds in the assets which they are looking at. Because of that, you know, most countries in Africa are looking at what kind of assets can be used to raise such kind of instruments or products. There is still lack of poor knowledge in terms of what is classified as green, for instance, or what is classified as blue, for instance, in some of the assets that we are looking at. So hence there is that hindrance in building the momentum across Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very quick and concise. Thank you, and to give us some of the barriers that we are seeing in financing in Africa. Joseph Oriol is the managing partner of Okavango Capital. And Joseph, what are the challenges of the green and sustainable standards that are used today?
Thank you very much, Trent. Perhaps I can give you a bit of context of who we are before and answer your question, very conscious of time. Hello, everyone. I'm the managing partner of Okavango Capital, which is an investment firm, was created a few years ago with the aim to back businesses that have positive impact on nature conservation and rural livelihoods, and by extension, obviously climate mitigation and adaptation. We have a team of 9 professionals, mostly based out of Kenya, but also in the UK and the US. The founders collectively bring about 6 decades of investment experience, mostly in emerging markets, small and medium enterprises, and deployed sort of over $1 billion of capital, and have strategic partnerships with the African Wildlife Foundation, which provides a lot of technical expertise, and with Conservation Capital, a firm where my partner Giles Davis founded and where I was a partner a few years ago. We've done a bit of work in this space that will lead to sort of a bit of a discussion of the challenges we've identified in bringing investment into natural capital. The 3 things that keep us busy today are the management of an impact debt vehicle. We call it Conservation Bonds, was set up by the African Wildlife Foundation and designed by one of our partners. That made 9 investments across 6 African countries in tourism and agriculture. We've made several club deals, and notably in carbon development but also conservation tourism, alternative proteins, and we're launching an investment vehicle focused on equity and mezzanine products in East and Southern Africa across these impact themes. Our approach is very much commercial first, very focused on impact, but we believe that impact cannot be sustainable if businesses are not sustainable themselves. And our investment thesis, from an impact perspective, I think through our investees, proves there's substance. Our companies have provided access to market to almost 200,000 people, over $5 million of revenue generated to conservation authorities in rural communities, and over 6 million tons of emissions avoided. If you want to go to the next slide, I'll refer to the challenges that we found rather than in the standards, in just bringing capital to nature-based solutions. I think that the main one we found is around the fact that the sector has a poor track record, and I think that's a function of the fact that historically investment in nature came from NGOs using money with zero cost of capital to replace grants, and there was a movement in the right direction, but of course the returns weren't investment grade, and that's created a perception that investing in nature and investing in climate was sort of a charity act. That obviously can change by doing things in the right angle. The second one is more around the fact that a lot of investment, particularly in nature-based solutions, which is the area where we have expertise, took a top-down approach. So it was often development institutions having programmatic approaches, saying we need to invest to create an investment facility for this particular landscape or this particular area, and those definitions were often narrow and were against the nature of the investment community, where you put money you back entrepreneurs and businesses and may help them expand into the right areas. The fact that the capital, this is probably the biggest challenge, is that there's this jointed capital supply, big funds overseas in large financial centers. We can think of the billion-dollar funds now being raised by Generation or HSBC Pollination, and then small, tiny facilities, for instance, CI Ventures and others that do great job, but there's a missing middle that needs capital. Some players are doing it across specific sectors, but there's a need to do that. The identity and the lack of collaboration between different players, and lastly, just the fact that funds were traditionally structured in a way that were sort of not fit for purpose. A lot of debt, chasing equity risk, etc. Now there's blended finance that's working well, and we're developing some innovation with our anchor investors, the European Investment Bank, which has been super supportive, and new potential partners that are bringing a lot of value to the table. I'll leave it there, and thanks so much.
Thank you. And let me then turn to the next speaker. Nuru Mugambi is the Director of Public Affairs at the Kenyan Bankers Association. Nuru Mugambi, the Kenya Bankers Association has 47 members organizations and has been very active in the promotion of green finance. Many of these organizations are already, building up a pipeline of green bankable projects. What are the bottlenecks to ensure the pace of implementation, and how can we overcome them?
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and also good to see old friends. Catherine, I just really want to just echo what my colleagues Vimal and Joseph have talked about. I think if we really want to see a systemic and sustainable transition across the continent, not just in Kenya, we need to move the conversation from the trillions and billions down to the millions and thousands. I think when you look at the narrative around climate investment on the continent, we're talking, we have trillion dollars chasing a very small market. And I think Vimal will bear me witness on this. And Joseph talked about that, the fact that we need to really rethink impact and development finance on the continent. If you look at the transactions, a lot of climate aligned investment is in the energy sector. And the reason for that is because it's probably the most efficient sector to deploy capital. But if we want to repurpose some of the key infrastructure areas, including water, which straddles both the blue and green economy, I think we need to start thinking about the local ecosystems, and we need to start structuring finance around supporting those local ecosystems. We've seen some recent really exciting projects coming through because of COVID, particularly in the water sector. Programs like Aqua for All, supporting initially Sidian Bank, now National Bank has come on board, and they're deploying smaller ticket sizes, I would say. And I think it is these smaller ticket sizes, blended finance partnerships, obviously leveraging on the traditional structures that we know, all the assets that we know, but really looking at contextualizing the finance to where it's needed most. And Mr. Odengo also talked about that, bringing it to the ground. At the grassroots level. So I'm happy to see these trends where we are looking at SMEs at the category of who need what, 5,000 euro, 10,000 euro, up to 40,000 euro. But it is through repurposing finance to support that level. We will see not only a practice shift, but also a culture shift. And I think that's what we're looking for on the continent. Maybe I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuru. Scaling it down, that's a good concept to take away from here. Jackson Kiplagat is the Regional Sustainable Investments Manager of WWF Kenya. Jackson, the WWF has been active at the national level as well as at the regional and global level as a key partner in the discussion for sustainable capital markets. What has been the priority in this respect for WWF to reallocate capital to sustainable investments?
Thank you very much, Catherine, for having us on this discussion. WWF and definitely many other civil society organizations recognize that finance is an important driver, and the financial system, of course, enables all types of economic activities that have an impact on nature, and definitely through our consumption and production patterns. We also appreciate that increasingly it is becoming critical that the financial sector, of course, integrates sustainability in its decision making. And for us at WWF, we are working to ensure that we facilitate improvement of the integration of environmental risks in financial decision making, as well as encouraging finance to be able to deliver greater investment for sustainable development. And we do this through using our capability as civil society organizations to be able to shape or influence finance, and even look at how best practices can be shaped from a finance point of view. A very good example of how this can happen and continue to happen is actually looking at providing information that can help shape behavior among consumers of various financial products, exerting pressure on shareholders, for example, globally in regard to moving and shifting from brown to green financing is something that organizations like ours should continue playing. But more importantly, also, an organization like WWF implements projects. and the new ways of mobilizing finance to be able to implement projects that deliver conservation outcome, of course, calls and will continue to call for innovative ways of financing. Have in mind ways of mobilizing resources through different models of blended financing, green and blue or sustainability bonds, or even pushing for enabling conditions. And a very good example of what WWF, alongside Kenya Bankers Association, Financial Sector Deepening Africa, and other partners, is actually driving the green bonds program in Kenya to the extent that we have been able to get an enabling condition that facilitates investors in this market to be able to enjoy or get attracted to investing more in green bonds. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackson. And the financial sector having to look more at the sustainability, I think is also a good message to take away. So thank you for that. We have another speaker coming up now. Oscar von Maltan is from the German Development Bank, KfW. Oscar, the German Development Bank is a key partner to green funds operating in Africa. Why is it necessary for a development bank to step in, and what is missing for traditional commercial banks to assume such a role?
Thank you very much, Katrin. Indeed, I think promotional banks such as KfW does indeed have a large role to play in innovative funding, and especially also in green bonds. I mean, as Germany's second largest bank, we see ourselves as a transformative promotional bank. And indeed, for about 7 years now, we have spearheaded green bonds, both as an issuer of green bonds and as an investor. In fact, KfW is the world's third largest issuer of green bonds, following the government of France and EIB. But we're also actually supporting quality standards in the green bond market, meaning the setting up of quality standards. For us as KfW, green bonds are a key contributor, an innovative instrument in financial markets towards achieving a carbon neutral world. So basically, we as KfW have ample experience, I would say, in the green bond markets, admittedly primarily in Europe. However, we would definitely like to share this experience and also promote green bonds in other regions. For instance, recently, KfW has co-founded in Latin America the Latin America Green Bond Fund called La Green. In Africa, where the needs are particularly big and the challenges as well, as we just heard, we as KfW still see numerous challenges in scaling up green bonds. Just to give you a few examples. The bond markets overall are small in Africa. And if you look at green bonds, Africa's share of the total global green bond markets is way below 1%. Also, there are hardly any non-sovereign local currency bonds in Africa. It's quite simple. Many private entities are just not used to issuing bonds. There's also another issue, of course, the size of many economies. There's just a lack of a sizable pipeline of projects that would meet the requirements of international investors or international entities that would want to invest in green bonds. What these requirements are and the specific challenges there relating to accountability, to transparency, etc., has already been mentioned by some of the previous speakers, so I won't go into that. But in a sense, it is an issue of credibility, of having the issuance of a bond as deemed green on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's also a question of an appetite of investors to see a bond as being green. Now, in all of these areas, I would say, and overcoming all of these challenges, a DFI such as a development finance institution, such as KfW, definitely can play a role in supporting the development of a green bonds market, also in Africa. Well, for instance, we have conceived as KfW, but we have also invested on behalf of the German government approximately 40% of the capital of the African Local Currency Bond Fund, ALCB, which is also looking into green bonds. And I guess the next speaker will elaborate a bit more about this. But to sum up, I think we as KfW, as a DFI, can play a role in promoting green bonds and furthering this particular instrument in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. And you alluded to it already. You came with another colleague, so to speak, on green bonds. Clemens Kallis is the co-CEO and founding partner of Lion's Head Global Partners. Clemens, the African Local Currency Bond Fund has issued the report Understanding the African Green Bond Market. The green standard, and notably the so-called gold standard, comes with a cost for second opinion and reporting. What will make the market ready to carry these costs?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and maybe let me try and answer it in a slightly different way than you might expect. I mean, we can talk about how to cover costs, and there's technical assistance funding out there to take care of that in some instances, but we should really ask ourselves what we're getting in return for spending that money. And yeah, as an investor, maybe not to overstate the obvious, yeah, we operate in relatively simple terms. Yeah, we're given a mandate to do something, and then we have targets of what kind of returns we're trying to achieve on the back of that mandate. And so if investors are given the mandate to invest in green bonds, and that channels more money into certain issuances than others, then as an issuer, you're getting a benefit for spending money upfront on establishing a green bond framework, adhering to gold standards and so on. So the best way to cover costs is basically to deliver something in return for it. Yeah, and ultimately, I think what we're trying to do, and where the global community has to come together, is that we have to make it much clearer why, in particular, local institutional investors should invest in green bonds, and what the imperative is for them and what they're getting in return for it. Yeah, this involves setting certain standards, making sure that those standards are easy to interpret and to communicate, that they're transparent. Also making sure that if we classify something as a green bond and then the use of proceeds doesn't meet the requirements stipulated upfront, that green certification, if you will, gets revoked, the same way that a credit rating gets removed if the issuer doesn't meet certain performance requirements. Now that gives an investor the framework to operate and to invest against their mandate, right? And so we are a fund where KfW, amongst others are investors, and they tell us go out and find green bonds, and therefore we go and find green bonds. If you look around the international markets, that message is being propagated very forcefully from a lot of people who drive investment policies. If you go to a Kenyan context, but the same applies to many other African countries, that message is out there. Yeah? Lots of people advocate investing in green instruments, but it is not really translated into an actionable part of an investment policy. If you're a pension fund manager, you have a set of investment guidelines that tell you what to do, up until the point where you either make more money by investing in green bonds, or being told explicitly to allocate a certain percentage of your portfolio into that asset class. It is very difficult for you to make big changes to the way you operate. So this is a roundabout way of really saying costs are out there in many instances, and they become a non-issue if we get something in return for it, and that's what we need to focus on.
Thank you. That was very useful. I have a last speaker, and I'm turning at the end, last but not least, to Paolo Lombardo, the head of the regional representation for East Africa of the European Investment Bank, the EU's very own, so to speak, bank. Paolo, The European Investment Bank has been a pioneer globally to set up the green bond market. At the same time, globally, only a very small share of green financial instruments are benefiting Africa specifically. What is the role of the EIB in the African context in the years to come?
Good afternoon to all, and thank you for inviting EIB to this event. Indeed, the European Investment Bank pioneered the green bond market by issuing the world's first ever green bond in 2007. 14 years later, we've issued more than 33 billion euros of these instruments. In turn, we've helped finance more than 200 renewable energy and energy efficiency projects all over the world, including in Africa. Only last year, we had a record issuance of green and sustainability bonds in excess of 10 billion euros, representing approximately 15% of our total yearly borrowing. We are quite proud of having created this asset class, but most importantly, I would say, having contributed to the financial sector transition to a greener model. Now, clearly what matters the most is what we do with the proceeds of these green bonds. On this front, the EIB has embarked on, I would say, an even more ambitious plan towards becoming a leading supporter of the transition to green economy on a global scale. And Africa is definitely one of our key priorities outside Europe. Our aim is quite ambitious. We aim to support at least 1 trillion in climate action and environmental sustainability investments during the current decade alone. And to achieve this, in 2019, we committed to have at least half of our yearly lending target focused on climate action, environmental sustainability investment. That is 50% of everything we do linked to climate by 2025. Additionally, we've taken the, I would say, extraordinary measure of aligning all of our activities to the Paris Agreement already in 2020. So we developed technologies to ensure that everything we do is contributing to maintaining the rise of world temperature to no more than 1.5 degrees. Now, previous speakers referred to the fact that climate change can bring quite a significant disruption to emerging markets, and Africa, unfortunately, is no exception. For this reason, already now, the EIB has committed to immediately dedicating 35% of all its activities in emerging markets in Africa to projects that have a climate security component. In 2020 alone, we provided in excess of 9 billion on financing into emerging markets outside the Union. That is about 30% of everything we do. And don't forget that we were set up to effectively support only European economies. Now, 13% of our activities is outside Europe. And 5 billion of that, 5 billion of the 9, are actually invested in Africa. And referring to the comments made earlier about adaptation, I'm pleased to say that we already doubled in 1 year our climate adaptation finance in developing countries from 300 to 600 million. What I think is important, and previous speakers referred to the standards that need to be adhered to. One distinctive feature of EIB when operating outside the European Union is that we apply the same environmental and social principles and quality standards as for lending within Europe. I think this is particularly important because we don't want to basically cut corners. Now, going forward, the EIB intends to push further its sustainability agenda in Africa, not simply by providing more green financing, but providing capacity building to support the green transition. And one of these examples is to do more project, preparation work. I think Nuno was referring to, don't forget that there are small projects below the trillions. And I think we need to start basically preparing projects early on. We will also go beyond traditional green investments because traditionally is mitigation. So you think about renewable energy, energy efficiency projects. And we will invest across the entire sustainability spectrum, which means, of course, supporting adaptation, circular economy, particularly important for us, protection and restoration of biodiversity, sustainable use of water resources, catastrophes mitigation. This is just to mention a few of the examples we will be focusing on. But let me conclude by echoing Peter's earlier intervention that adaptation will be the key word going forward for us on the African continent. And EIB intends to play a major role in this area. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you, Paolo, and thank you all for being so disciplined, because I've chased you a bit through this, and now we do have still 20 minutes to have a few questions that are coming in on the chat. There's one question to Nuhu, I think, in the chat. How can startups involved in carbon emission mitigation actions access such financing? Could you address that?
Sure, thank you. I think I get a lot of these questions, and we probably need to think about a platform to just bring all the information together, because increasingly a number of banks are offering product lines that are tied to climate mitigation, but they're not calling it climate mitigation product, right? So you just have to get in touch with various financial institutions. I can post some of them on the chat. At KCB, for example, depending on the size of the transaction and capital you're looking for. I know KCB, for example, is Kenya's first GCF certified bank, and they do have products which are probably bigger tickets, I would say large corporates. However, I earlier mentioned National Bank and Sidian Bank. They have very interesting solarization product targeting the water sector. So it really just depends on the capital you're looking for. Banks probably don't say this is a green product, right? So it's about really understanding the financial institution you're already working with, the institution that sees your cash flows coming through, and then having that conversation about what partnerships and products that they have. EIB, for example, has talked about the products that they have. Mr. Joseph has talked about on the, I guess, the private equity and venture capital side as well. So it really just depends on the capital you're looking for, and just doing a little bit of research. But happy to post more on the chat. Thank you.
I think, yes, people will want to know how they can access that. So if you can post something, I think that will be very much appreciated. Maybe others want to address that question as well. I'm also looking at Paolo on how Kenya and Africa can benefit from the EIB green funding instruments. I have a related question around that. If you want to jump in, or if anybody else wants to jump in on that question.
Sorry, I was fighting with my mute button. Well, lack or inadequate funding is often cited as a key, impediment to investing in emerging markets, and Africa is no exception. We've heard a lot about financial instruments. Some of them are quite sophisticated, but funding availability is only half of the story. Another key impediment to investment is limited project bankability, and I think Oscar hit that point very clearly. In other words, many projects are simply not quite ready for financing. Now, we at EIB work with all partners across Africa to address this problem head on. And we do this by providing capacity building and technical assistance. And I referred earlier to the fact that project preparation is what we're going to do more of, a lot more of in the future. In the case of intermediate lending in favor, for example, of small and medium-sized enterprises, we support our African and Kenyan banking intermediaries finding optimal ways to reach out to final beneficiaries which are unserved, granting them, de-risking solutions. So just providing financing alone doesn't do the trick, doesn't push them to reach out to certain categories of potential clients. So de-risking is definitely one area. So we encourage actually all developers, promoters specializing in green and sustainable investments that are experiencing some problems in putting together bankable projects to reach out to us. We are in Nairobi. The door is open. Over to you, Catherine.
Sorry, there was a bit of a microphone back and forth. Sorry. So thank you very much for that. I want to end at the end with the going back to the government of Kenya. So before that, I wanted to ask one more question to Clemens. You were talking about sort of green results, and that this is, what are the expectations from financiers on what kind of green results you will to deliver? Can you maybe say a little bit about that?
Sure, and maybe that question, or the reason why you're asking the question, points at the heart of one of the problems, and that is that expectations are very different. They're not standardized, and so everybody's to some degree being forced to come up with their own outcomes. Yeah, and in the first instance, we're all grappling to find the right metrics to define what a green bond ultimately accomplishes. Yeah, you can either link it around CO2 reduction, which tends to be the most easily understandable and the most easy to communicate standard. But from our experience, every investor in our fund, for example, has a slightly different approach to quantifying even something as simple as that. Some of them look at it in the context of outcomes in terms of metric tons of CO2 reduced. Others look at it in terms of a carbon return by ascribing a value to a ton of CO2, and then looking at it in the context of the amount of investment made. Yeah, we are increasingly hearing, as was mentioned before, that all of this needs to be linked to mitigation and resilience. I think we all intuitively know what that means, but we're all struggling to some degree to express this in a quantifiable manner, or even in a qualitative manner that makes one transaction comparable to another one. So I think the short answer is people want to see CO2 emission reduction, and they want to see increased resilience and adaptation. The long answer is that what that exactly means requires a lot more work and standardization.
Thank you very much for that. I have one question that's sort of a bit more towards maybe civil society. And first of all, there's the knowledge gap came up quite often, and how can we bridge that gap? That's one question. And then more generally, how can civil society, what's civil society's role in this discussion? I don't know whether Jackson wants to take those two questions on.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Yes, civil society have a very important role to play within this space. One as a very important source of information. The other one is actually driving or playing the role between government and private sector in terms of advocacy, trying to push for enabling conditions that promote sustainable finance, but at the same time also ensuring that as part of the implementation of the same, the monitoring component and feedback to either the private sector or government in terms of performance of policy, but at the same time, performance of the various products out there. It will also be critical to continue seeing civil society organizations championing and actually pushing for investor conscience in putting their money where sustainability is assured. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackson.
Can I jump in a little bit on that?
You can, and then I have another question for you. Go ahead.
Great. Now, in terms of narrowing the knowledge gap, the Kenya government, in collaboration with FSD Africa, has already designed a very, very inclusive and innovative climate finance training, which includes up to the capacity building for the issuance of the sovereign green bond, the blue bond, based on the guidelines that we had already issued. The course is jointly taken by IED, Cambridge University, and we designed it based on the demand and the local situation. So it is, we know that the capacity which is required, particularly to enable African countries to move and make the best of the green bond, given that it is very new, as has been alluded by my colleague from the European Investment. So we have a very long-term course, which is for the policymakers, technical, up to masters, and also to the PhD in the next 5 years, because that is where the world is going. So we have a good course, but below that, we also have these short courses with the CBI, climate bond initiatives for the standards on how to develop, screening of the projects, development of the pipelines, reporting of the impact and reporting of also of the projects, and also coding, tracking, and verification. So there is a whole package going with the bond, and we can be able to share with the team the packages that we have so that we ensure that the civil society organizations from the private sector is fully educated and trained on that, and also the policymakers from the government. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I do want to, we did do this session together with the Kenyan government, so I do want to give you once more sort of the word before I conclude. Peter Odengo, you're the Director of Climate in the Climate Finance Department of the National Treasury here in Kenya, and Kenya has been a founding member of the International Platform for Sustainable Finance. What are Kenya's priority areas of interest as part of the platform's discussions?
Kenya, being a founder member of the International Platform, you always know that our priority is to finance adaptation. The government of Kenya believes and knows, based on our policies, that public resources alone will not be able to enable us meet our net zero balance trajectory by 2050, and also will not enable us to realize our upgraded NDC, national determined contribution, of about 62 billion. So our priority is to see how, one, we can enhance supporting of adaptation measures and building the resilience at the local level. Two, we also have a priority to crowd in public-private partnership and private money to support the government in realizing our pipeline. Three, capacity is very, very key. Without capacity, it is not possible. And the fourth one probably is that Kenya requires that green bond is a new baby in town. There are a lot of barriers, there are a lot of misunderstanding, and if compared to the traditional brown financing, we need preferential premium support for the green bond to see the light of the day. It is indeed, over the next 10 years, it is the green bonds, blue bonds, the social bonds that is likely to take the largest stage, because if you look to finance adaptation and adaptation measures, because if you look at the money that is flowing, over $1 trillion flowing globally, and I said there only less than 28% is going there, and there is no clear business case for financing adaptation, and it will take time. Kenya government is very, very ahead, because we already, the Central Bank of Kenya also released the climate now requires climate risk in the projects that are being developed and financed. But those ones now require that we need a premium to enable the case for the people that will follow the path that we have. That yes, we need to shift the gear from the traditional public financing towards this. A premium for the green bond, better coupon rate, better coupon sizes, and also involving the local people in also benefiting, because Kenya has already got a lot of incentives. The proceeds of green bonds are not taxed. So we also think that local people should also invest in this so that they also get this preferential trade and benefits in our realization towards a green build back better, money to where it is needed. Thank you.
Asante, Peter. My team is telling me there's one more sort of question to Vimal, but if you can answer in 1 minute. Vimal, do you see some specific new trends emerging in the capital markets in this field of sustainable finance in Kenya or at the regional level?
Yes, thank you very much. So there are some new trends which are happening in Africa, especially in capital markets. One is related to conservation finance, which is based on sustaining the environment and conservation, not only of wildlife, but also of human environment. This is linked to instruments like development impact bonds or social bonds, which is also coming up. So like, for example, gender bonds is one of the key aspects that we are looking to support in Africa, especially in some of the markets we're looking at. We're looking at gender bonds in Morocco, in Tanzania. We're also looking at development impact bonds in Kenya, and more of green bonds. The other trend which we are also seeing is carbon markets. There's a lot of momentum towards conservation of forests or agroforestry. So working together with small-scale farmers in how to preserve this environment so that they can earn carbon credits, which are eventually monetized, can really help improve the livelihoods of the African people. So that is also another trend which is coming up. And lastly, I would like to say also there is payment for ecosystem services. So Africa has a lot of natural resources. We can look at the lakes, the rivers, and the forests, and which are getting encroached by land. So that is another area where through ownership at national priorities, given some of the standardization of also policies that we're looking at, policies which are driven towards conserving that environment are very key. So I think those are some of the trends that we are looking at in Africa.
Thank you, Vimal. I have to sort of cut you a little bit because I think we have to conclude. It's been really a pleasure to listen to such rich insights, and I know that you have a lot more knowledge to give out. The panelists here have highlighted Africa's massive needs in terms of investments to help address climate change, biodiversity, as well as poverty and the SDGs by 2030. And we've had also seen that frameworks are needed for green finance to be well understood by the market actors. Smaller ticket sizes to scale it down was one thing that was stressed, and I think is a bit surprising maybe to many. And more project preparation work is needed in sustainable and circular projects. I think that's some of the things that I picked up. Sustainability-related financial instruments are strong assets, and to help us do this we need to build strong frameworks. Investors are indeed increasingly asking for enhanced clarity on which economic activities they can unambiguously consider environmentally sustainable for investment purposes. So this is a growing market, so to speak. But we do need more dialogue. We need the dialogue between the authorities, the regulators, the corporate and financial actors, but also we had civil society here and national and multilateral development financial institutions. So this is why we announced in July that we will develop a comprehensive EU strategy to help increase sustainable finance in our partner countries. And we need to address these challenges and constraints faced by our partner countries, and Africa in particular, in scaling up sustainable finance. And for that, we need to provide dedicated support tailored to the needs of each country. We continue to be committed to playing a leading role internationally in this respect through the active participation in the International Platform on Sustainable Finance, in which we are happy to count Kenya as an active member. The EU is also exploring the setting up of a technical assistance program to provide capacity building to our partner countries in sustainable finance. For instance, supporting them in developing pipelines for green bankable projects or in developing credible and robust sustainable finance frameworks. Kenya is one of the strongest examples in the African context to prepare for the shift in the financial streams due to a strong banking sector and a forward-looking national treasury. Panelists have shown the value of working together to harness the full potential of sustainable finance. There is no other way if we want to collectively deliver on the sustainable development goals. I therefore want to really thank all the panelists for making time and sharing their insight. And I know, as I said, you have a lot more to say. I thank you all listeners for your interest and active participation, and I wish you a continued productive conference. Asante sana.
Thank you. Thank you very much.